The hatred and killing continues because they want it to, or because they don't want peace enough to stop it. That was Mark Bowden. My name's Kevin, and this is History Goon. So I'm sure you've guessed from the uplifting opening quote, this episode's going to be a doozy. I know that you folks are intelligent enough to read, so you probably know exactly what we're talking about already. At this point in 2025, if you have even a passing interest in military history or military movies or media of anything like that, you've more than likely seen or read Black Hawk Down. Came out the movie, I believe, came out in 2001, and the book was published. Let's see here. Wow. The book was published long enough ago that in the opening page it says the companion Black Hawk Down television documentary and CD-ROM are available for order from KR Video by calling a number or logging onto the web. Whew. That was a minute ago, guys. We had to call in. Looks like the first printing of the book was August of 2001. And I just happened to have a copy. Look at that. So the biggest question that I had leading into this is why? Why were we there? Why were we involved? What were we doing in Somalia? The first thing I think we really need to go over is what led the U.S. to send Rangers and Delta Force into a situation that went from fine to FUBAR in a flash. From what I can see, it all started with a man that would become known as Major General Mohammed Syed Barre. He was a military man. He launched a coup d'etat October 21st, 1969. This came directly after the assassination of Abdirashid Shermaki, which I know that I said that wrong. Unfortunately, Somalian is not one of the one languages that I speak, so I'm going to butcher some of this stuff. He was second in command to the president of Somalia. He'd run the country with his quote-unquote Supreme Revolutionary Council, which is the SRC, which is what we're going to refer to it from now on as, because I don't want to say it constantly. They would arrest members of the former government, they banned political parties, dissolved the Supreme Court system, and suspended the Constitution, which are all things that you would expect to happen under a military dictatorship. And he always claimed that he wasn't a dictator, but they were. They, like the government that was in charge before he overthrew it with the military. They were dictators. He wasn't. Right? So just keep that in mind. He's the good guy. Wasn't all bad, though. He did implement a campaign to increase urban and rural literacy, which jumped the rate dramatically. If you're not real familiar with Somalia, it is not a very developed country at all. Even compared to other countries like directly in its area, Somalia is pretty undeveloped for the most part. At least at this point it was. I'm not sure how it is now. I know that they have a pirate stock market that you can invest in. I'm not sure exactly how to do it. I don't think I would, but I know you can. So you can put money into these, into their little raiding parties that they go out and they do piracy on these giant cruise ships and oil tankers and all this stuff. And yeah, you can pay to fund those and see if you get a return on your investment, which is crazy to say the least. But there's also apparently Russian companies that you can pay to go pirate hunting off the coast of Somalia. which also crazy. I think it'd be much cooler to be one of the guys that goes into like the big parks and safari lands and stuff like that where they hunt poachers. That seems like it'd be way cooler than hunting pirates. Anyway, under his command, they also nationalized a land and industry program. This was to try to reconnect Somalia with the Arab world because they are an Arab country. And he did this by joining the Arab League in 1974. The League's main goal was to, quote, draw closer the relations between member states and coordinate collaboration between them to safeguard their independence and sovereignty and to consider in a general way the affairs and interests of the Arab countries, which sounds like a bunch of political nonsense to just say, hey, we're going to just form a coalition of Arab countries. Probably could have just said that in the long run, made it a little bit easier. Barre would also go on to chair the strangely named Organization of African Unity, because I'm not sure if you're up to date with things going on in Africa. A lot of them, like different countries over there, don't like each other, and a lot of them don't like themselves because there's constantly civil war and other things. It seems like when we're on this show, I'm starting to notice a pattern here. When we do old school history, we run into the Ottomans. And we're like, the Ottomans kind of suck. When we do anything in Africa, we're like, oh, this is going to end badly for everyone involved. Spoiler alert, yeah, kind of. In July of 1976, Barre disbanded the SRC in favor of his newly formed Somali Revolutionary Socialist Party, which is a mix of tenets of Islam and socialism, which, if we go back to the Ahmad Shah Massoud episode, which happened, some of that was going on at the same time. Socialism or communism, which is what this would turn into basically, and Islam don't mix, because under hardcore socialism or communism, the state is your god. You don't get to choose, which is why, like, during communism, the Eastern Orthodox Church basically went underground in a lot of places because they weren't really allowed to exist. The biggest part of what he wanted for his country was to become fully Muslim and fully self-sufficient. In 1977, something called the Ogaden War kicks off, and this is a small-scale war over the Ogaden region, which is claimed by both Somalia and Ethiopia. This is another proxy war between the U.S. and Russians during the Cold War. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff like that went on in Africa during the Cold War. You had, like, obviously Russians, communist-backed forces here facing off against Western-backed forces over here, causing little civil wars. Very complicated with a lot of it. There is a few guys that I want to cover that were involved with some of these. Very convoluted, very confusing. But the more you get into it, the more, I don't know. I don't think it gets any easier when you look into it further than just kind of like from a bird's eye view. The weird part with this one is the Russians are actually backing the Ethiopians, where the U.S. is backing Somalia. And why that's weird is because Ethiopia is a historically Christian country. And again, generally, religion and communism do not mix well. So you would think that it would be the opposite way, especially because of, like, World War II, where the Brits had a ton of holdings in Ethiopia. But it's, again, super strange how all of it worked. So after World War II, the Brits pulled out of what was then the Hod and also the Ogaden regions. That would become Somalia in 1960. So these two regions combined to become like Somalia as like a united country, basically. Also, if you're not familiar where Somalia is, if you look at a map of Africa where you have the horn on the eastern half of it, Somalia is that horn. In September 1974, the Emperor of Ethiopia was ousted by the military council called the Derg. This obviously threw the country into turmoil because you have a power vacuum, and that always happens. And another group emerges called the Western Somalia Liberation Front. They're calling for the complete annexation of Ogaden by Somalia. By 1977, the Derg were in full control of Ethiopia, and they were really hard on the people there, particularly those of the Western Somalia Liberation Front. And at this point, the country has completely converted over to Marxism. Made my feelings about communism pretty well known here, so I'm not going to go too far into that. Just remember, kids, the F in communism stands for freedom and food. The new pipeline of Soviet weaponry helped, but they needed a lot more. The Kremlin ordered 15,000 Cuban troops to head to Africa, along with volunteers from North Korea and Yemen. With all that going on, Somalis asked for help from Uncle Sam, and seeing an opportunity to get into a dick measuring contest, for lack of a better term, with the communists, Uncle Sam obliges. Guns and ammunition are sent to the Horn of Africa. In October, the Somalis attempted their most significant offensive to capture the Ethiopian city of Harar. Here they faced 40,000 Ethiopian troops and 11,000 Cuban troops backed by Soviet artillery and air power. The Ethiopians come out on top and begin to push the Somalis out of Ogaden systematically. They are completely pushing them out. By March 1978, the Ethiopians have captured almost all of the Ogaden, which basically forces the now defeated Somalis to give up their claim to the region. After the defeat over the Ogaden region, the Somali government starts to shift. April 9th, 1978, gunfire kicks off in the village of Afgoy, just south of Mogadishu, which we are going to be headed to Mogadishu here in about 20 some odd years. CIA estimate has somewhere around 24 militia officers, 2,000 soldiers, and 65 tanks involved in the coup attempt. Now, why would the CIA have any kind of information about a coup happening in Africa? Probably the same reason they would have information on them happening in South America, the Middle East generally, Southeast Asia. I'm not saying they did it, but also, if you're listening, hi. The fighting lasted about a day and failed in the long run. 17 of the ringleaders are rounded up, questioned, and then executed by Barre's orders. One of the organizers of this coup that managed to sneak out of the country was a man that would go on to do a lot of damage in Somalia, named Mohammed Farah Aidid. By the late 1980s, Barre and his political party became really unpopular due to the loss of the war with Ethiopia and his increasing stranglehold on the country. Because that's exactly what it was. There is no such thing as a friendly dictatorship. And we are in, for this episode, we're on a continent where there is more dictatorial warlords per capita than there is anywhere else ever in the world. You could probably come up with 10 to 20 dictators just in Africa over the course of 30 years, depending on where you look. There was so many of them. But due to his stranglehold, this led to insurgency groups popping up, some of which were being armed and supported by the Derg out of Ethiopia, some of which may or may not be armed from the CIA. Who knows? Who's to say? We weren't there. I mean, I'm sure some of the weapons that they were using were the ones that we sent them, but that's none of my business. I just pay my taxes and pay for all that stuff. Well, not this stuff, because I was negative 11 years old at this time. But all of this fighting would lead to the beginning of the Somali Civil War. Most of these groups would work together to overthrow the Somali government, and when it eventually collapsed January 26th of 1991, that's when the real fighting begins. Because again, we have a power vacuum, and whenever there's a power vacuum, people are going to jump in and try to take it. It turned into tribal warfare for control of the country. The group that would emerge as the big one would be the United Somali Congress, led by Ali Mahdi Mohammed, and his second in command would be General Mohammed Farah Aidid. Again, that's a name that's going to come up a lot in this episode. He is not a good person. And I'm not just saying that because he's fighting the U.S. and I'm like, waving a flag and whatnot, like Jim Duggan style. He's generally a waste of genetic material. And you'll see why. I'm not saying that, again, because he's on the wrong side of it. I'm saying that because it's true. And I'm sure people will be like, oh, you're racist because you don't think Africans. No, I don't care. Say what you want. This dude's a scumbag. Absolute piece of shit. So obviously, with these guys taking over, things are not good in Mogadishu under this organization, especially under the areas that Aidid controls. Hunger has always been a problem in Somalia due to difficulty of growing crops and storing them. Very poor country, and under Aidid, hunger became a weapon in the city of Mogadishu. It got so bad that the UN Security Council passed Resolution 733 on January 23rd, 1992. This was a full-on arms embargo on the country and an agreement to send humanitarian aid to Somalia due to the heavy loss of human life going on under the warlords. This is one of the saddest statistics that I have covered on the show so far. And it's basically the big reason that the UN is getting involved in the first place. Of the 10 million people in Somalia, over half of them are considered to be in severe danger of starvation and malnutrition-related diseases. 300,000 people died outright in the first 2 to 4 months of 1992 after Aidid and these other warlords took over. So by, April of 1992, we have 300,000 people, over 250,000 people have starved to death under these guys because they are weaponizing hunger and food. Under the orders of UN Security General, a fantastic name, Boutros Ghali, the first United Nations operation in Somalia, Unisom 1, which sounds like a sleeping pill. Are you nervous for your long flight? Try Unisom 1. Unisom 1 would be deployed. The UN, they really meant well, but poorly executed this operation to the point that the US had to step in and offer to take the lead on the operation, at which point the mission title was changed to United Task Force, shortened to UNITAF. The UNITAF force was made up of about 37,000 personnel, of which 25,000 were American. Other countries that contributed to UNITAF were Australia, Bangladesh, Belgium, Botswana, Canada, Egypt, Ethiopia, France, Germany, Greece, India, Ireland, Italy, Kuwait, Morocco, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Spain, Sweden, Tunisia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom, Zimbabwe. Some of you guys are going to be old enough to remember that Animaniacs scene where Yakko was just going through and naming all the countries on the map. I feel like that's what I just did. The main part of the U.S. force at this point was from the Marine Corps. And I mention this because one of these Marines that ends up going to Somalia to help as part of UNITAF was a man named Hussein Mohammed Farah Aidid, son of the warlord. Not much of this operation went real well from the jump, and came to a head June 5th of 1993. Pakistanis involved were doing a routine inspection of some quote-unquote authorized weapons storage sites. This is a problem because the warning of the inspection came on the 4th, which is the Muslim day of Sabbath, and Aidid wasn't around for the warning. The responsibility fell to his lieutenant, Abdi Hassan Awale. He threw an absolute fit about this because he wasn't, quote, qualified for being around for the inspections, which if you're the lieutenant for this guy, you'd probably be qualified to be around for guys to come in and look at your rifles and go, yeah, these are rifles. They're okay. They're being stored safely, which is essentially all they wanted to do. They wanted to come in and make sure everything was being stored in a correct manner where, I don't know, kids can't just grab them. Because apparently gun safety is worldwide, something you should be very cognizant of. I personally am a big believer in gun safes, or if you have a handgun, I'm not sponsored by these guys, but get a stop box. They're pretty rad. You can put your pistol in it, and there's no electronics, there's no keypads. It's all just like finger locks. And I can attest to the fact that children can't get into them. 5 out of 5 thumbs up for the stop box. The UN didn't buy this excuse. They planned the inspections anyway. Another thing that is considered kind of suspicious by Aidid's forces was the fact that only his stores were scheduled to be inspected that day. I'm sure that everybody else's were being inspected, maybe not the same day, but maybe. Who knows? He doesn't know. I mean, the UN has a lot of people there. I mean, there's people from, again, a billion countries that I just read off that could all be doing these inspections. They could all be happening the same day. They could be staggered. It doesn't matter. He thought it was weird that only his are being inspected. One of the locations that was being searched was Radio Free Somalia, which is a small local station that was run by Aidid forces and used to really ramp up the hate and rhetoric against the UN forces. Aidid would personally take to the airwaves and accuse the UN of, quote, colonizing and having, quote, ideas of imperialist designs, which is rich coming from a guy who is basically a dictator in his own country. Now let's hop back to the day of the inspections. The Pakistanis entered the radio station, and as they did, they met an angry mob of Somalis yelling things like, Unisam, go home, and stuff like that. Around 10 a.m., the inspection wrapped up, and right about then is also when gunfire erupted from 5 different directions surrounding the radio station. The Pakistanis, having really no choice, returned fire, but they are badly outnumbered, and they ran out of ammo pretty quickly. One of the Pakistani soldiers told a story of a few of his squad mates grabbing wooden planks and using them to swat grenades back out as the Somalis were throwing them in, which makes sense because I don't know if it's like a stereotype or racist or whatever. I don't care. If there's one thing I know about Pakistanis, they fucking love cricket. So these guys are probably super good at this. This is a really well-coordinated attack. As this attack is going on, about a mile away, 100 Pakistanis are headed back to where they were stationed in a convoy. They stopped to remove a wall of tires that the Somalis had built into a roadblock. The Somalis love tire roadblocks. We're going to see that as the story continues. If there's one thing they like more than starving their own people, right? It's building roadblocks out of tires, and they are really fast at it. Now all I can picture is just a bunch of NASCAR pit crews just zipping tires off and stacking them just with a stopwatch and 38 seconds. That's pretty good. We built this thing 6 feet high, 20 feet across. That's pretty good. As these guys are clearing the roadblock, they come under heavy fire. They're taking small arms fire from both sides of the street, and according to General Ikram of the Pakistani forces, they fought for 2.5 hours in a tight, narrow stretch of road. I personally have never been in a gunfight. I have talked to people that have been in gunfights and combat, and they're like, yeah, 2.5 minutes will feel like an hour and a half. So 2.5 hours probably felt like they were there for a year and a half, just shooting back and forth with these guys. In the course of the fighting, a call for help went out, and the Italians responded. They sent out a helicopter gunship, and they opened fire and wounded 3 Pakistanis and 0 Somalis. Good job, guys. The U.S. Army Rangers sent in Ranger Team 2-1 to insert by Humvee, locate, reinforce, and free the trapped convoy. The Rangers' Humvee cruised through Mogadishu with the gunners destroying several militia technicals and killing several militia fighters. So, what a technical is basically any kind of vehicle that you can put a machine gun, um, a missile launcher, anything like that, and then drive it around is a technical. Some of these things had like recoilless rifles on them that are firing like 105 millimeter rounds out of them. They're really nothing to mess with. The stereotypical technical would be like if you've ever seen pictures of, I don't know, anywhere in North Africa or the Middle East where they have a Toyota Hilux with a machine gun on it. And the Toyota Hilux is one of those like bucket list trucks that will never get here because of, I'm not kidding, taxes and selling chickens to the Germans. We can't get Toyota Hiluxes. If you want more about that, Fat Electrician did a really cool video on it. Such a weird story, but he tells it really well. Anyway, the Rangers proceed to get through town and link up with the Pakistani soldiers, fighting off Somali snipers that were attacking from windows nearby. The Pakistani captain then sent the Rangers to clear a nearby bombed-out building, which the militants were using as a sniping position, which was preventing the Pakistanis from moving or taking care of any of their wounded. Which, that's like the oldest sniping tactic in the world, basically, is you don't always shoot to kill. Sometimes it's easier, not easier, sometimes it's better to shoot to wound, because shoot to kill, you're taking one guy out of the fight. Shoot to wound, you're taking 3 guys out of the fight, because you have the guy that's down and then 2 people to carry him off. Go watch Full Metal Jacket. Just saying. The Rangers cleared the building floor by floor, and after some close quarters fighting, they also killed the snipers across the street on a rooftop. With this all done, the Rangers used a satchel charge to destroy the obstruction blocking the road. This allows the Pakistani convoy to escape, effectively getting out of the ambush site. This ambush that they thought was kind of just like something that happened killed 24 Pakistani soldiers, while 57 Pakistanis, 3 Americans, and 1 Italian were wounded. Which is strange, because in all the research that I did, right, for this one particular part, the only Italians that came up were the dudes in the helicopter. So either this guy moved wrong and like rolled his ankle or something in the helicopter, or he got wanged with a 7.62 round from somewhere randomly and got hit, which is completely reasonable, because 7.62 by 3.9, which is what the AK fires. I don't have one around because I no longer own an AK. It's a pretty substantial round. A lot of people will, AKs aren't that accurate. You don't necessarily have to be accurate because they hit like a truck. There's a lot of stories from guys that were in like the global war on terror where they're like, yeah, we'd shoot a guy 5 or 6 times with an M16, which is a 223 round. I'm sure I've got one here somewhere. And they would just like get up and run off. If you get hit somewhere without plates by a 7.62, you're going to go down, and it's not going to be good. It's a 30 caliber round. It's beefy. Not something I want to get shot with. Not that I want to get shot with anything, but yeah, AK rounds are really nothing to mess with, especially at fairly close distance, like a lot of this fighting is going to be. The following month, July 12th, the first attempt to capture Aidid himself would take place. Well, not necessarily capture him. Keep in mind, the orders from this particular operation came directly from the White House and President Bill Clinton. A conference of high-ranking elders, intellectuals, businessmen, and Klan members, not those ones, not those guys. I'm pretty sure Klan members with a K, their heads would explode if you ever dropped them off in Africa. They'd be like, what the hell is all this? And aneurysms. These are Klan members of the Haber-Gadir, along with prominent members of other Somali clans such as the Ogaden, Dir, Majitarine, Shekale, and Morosaid. This is supposed to take place in order to discuss how to respond to a peace initiative from Admiral Jonathan Howe. His idea was to get them all together to try to stop fighting each other and say, hey, maybe let's send a couple of each of you guys off to like a council and try to square things away so you can stop shooting each other and starving each other to death. You know, maybe act like people for a second. A handful of the elders, including the most senior of the Brigadier, Sheikh Haji Muhammad Iman Adin, had met with Howe 3 days earlier, and he implored them to search for peaceful resolutions to this, at the time, 4-week-long war between Aidid's forces and UNISOM II, which is UNITAF. It's the same thing, basically. Abdi Quebadias Villa was that's weird. It goes from like Arabic, maybe Spanish? Anyway. Which, I mean, there was a lot of that happening in Spain at one point in time, which we'll talk about. So he's selected for the talks, and I'm retarded. That's a building, not a person. Di Quebias Villa was selected for the talks because it possessed a large room on the second floor capable of holding a pretty large gathering of over 100 people. This meeting had been publicized in Mogadishu's newspapers as a peace conference the day before, and an American war correspondent in Mogadishu, who was a witness of the raid that's about to happen, his name is Scott Peterson, corroborates the Somali account that a group of elders had gathered to discuss how to put an end to the violence between the SNA and UN forces. A CIA informant, shocker, inside the clan passed intelligence that a meeting was to take place, and they kind of told them, like, some of the people that are gathering here are guys that took part in the June 5th, 1993 attack. Aidid himself did not approve of the meeting taking place, as his role as a clan leader is being kind of questioned at this point in time. Because some of the people from his clan are going to this meeting and going, we need to figure out how to stop this from happening any further. Maybe we have to get rid of him to get this to stop. So he was allegedly tipped off that something would be happening to this conference a few hours previous to it happening. That information came from either his own intel network or by some of the Italian element of UNISOM II who were supposedly sympathetic to his cause, which seems crazy to me. I mean, maybe not. Who knows? For at least a week before the raid, American Special Forces staked out the compound, surveilling Aidid and other members of the SNA. They want to see where they're coming from, where they're going to, who they're talking to. These guys are like, what'd they have for lunch today? Where'd they eat it? They're doing their job. The QRF, which is the Quick Response Force, has been on standby for the past couple days, waiting for an order to attack. These guys are ready to take off on 5 minutes' notice. That's U.S. Special Forces doesn't mess around. We saw in the Operation Nimrod episode. The SAS doesn't play around. They're ready to roll. This is kind of our first time on the show talking about U.S. Special Forces. Again, they don't play. When they get told, you guys are going in here in 20 minutes, they're like, okay, we'll be there in 15. Earlier that morning, the U.S. State Department issued a warning that the CIA had received a memo revealing a plan by the SNA to launch a large-scale attack on UN officials in Mogadishu. This is giving American commanders the excuse they needed to launch the assault. And the aftermath of the raid, it'd be discovered that the CIA report had been incorrect. Shocker. Following confirmation of the code word Michigan, an armada of 17 helicopters took off from Mogadishu International Airport and surrounded the villa within minutes. 10:18 a.m., a CIA informant named Omar Hassan Ghanay walked out of the meeting to the main gate of the compound in full view of the waiting attack helicopters that have just started circling. He's wearing an arranged set of clothing as a signal, basically as a go signal. Seconds later, following visual confirmation of the signal, and without any warning, 6 AH-1 Cobras and 4 OH-58 Kiowas launched a total of 16 tow missiles and 2,200 rounds of 20mm cannon fire into the gathering. They fired continuously, uninterrupted, for 6 minutes. I don't know what the cyclic rate is of the guns that they're firing 2,200 rounds of. But 6 minutes of uninterrupted fire between 20 millimeter cannons and rockets is crazy. The Cobra launched the tows into the second floor of the villa where the conference was taking place, then specifically targeted the roof in an attempt to crush the occupants below and destroy the stairwells of the building to prevent anyone from escaping. If there's one thing the U.S. is really good at in war, it's having better toys than other people and throwing a lot of money at problems. Chief Warrant Officer Chris Robin had this to say, quote, "Our orders were to destroy the conference room on the second floor where everybody was supposed to be meeting. Then we were to destroy the staircase in the back of the house so no one could get away. I was flying security for Battle Position 1, and my job was to wax anybody if they tried to leave the compound, or if they came outside and tried to shoot at us. Then I was supposed to destroy the front gate of the compound so that the infantry could get in." Moments before the tows hit the villa, Abdi Kwabadi had just begun addressing the crowd of approximately 80 to 90 Somalis that had gathered on the second story of the villa. Present among them were prominent sheiks, former judges, famous poets, professors, intellectuals who represented the most respected and best educated of the Habir Gadir, most notably the Habir Gadir's most senior elder, Sheikh Haji Muhammad Iman Aden, who was over 90 years old at the time of this attack. He was killed instantly by the first 2 tow missiles in the volley, along with other elders that were all sitting directly against the wall that the missiles hit. A highly regarded poet, Mawali Soyan, would also die in the strike. Other eminent Somalis from other clans who were in attendance were also killed. Mark Bowden, the author of Black Hawk Down, had a really good quote in the book that I thought would be kind of good to share here. Quote, "What Farah saw and heard was a flash of light and a violent crack. He stood and took one step toward and heard the whoosh of a second missile. There was another flash and an explosion. He was thrown to the floor. Thick smoke filled the room. He tried to move forward, but his way was blocked by bodies, a bloody pile of men, and parts of men a meter high. Those who survived the first blast were feeling along the wall, groping for the door when the second missile exploded. The air was thick with dark smoke and smelled of powder, blood, and burned flesh. Farah found the stairs, stood, and had taken one step down when a third missile exploded, disintegrating the staircase. He tumbled to the first floor. He sat up stunned and felt himself for broken bones and wet spots. There was another explosion above him, then another and another." That's pretty dark. I mean, yeah, these guys are part of a warlord group, a clan that's killing their own people by starving them to death and just outright shooting them to death and all that. That's still a pretty horrific way to die. Whew. Among those killed were multiple women who had been serving tea for the gathering, children who happened to be playing in the villa's courtyard, and civilians who had been hit by stray 20 millimeter rounds. Again, not great, not a great look. Aidid was not present at the meeting. So, now that he's still alive and not dead in this, what used to be a building that's now just a rubble and guts heap, this is going to give him ammunition to use later. Spoiler alert, when you kill civilians in a war, usually doesn't work the way you want it to. At 10:23 a.m., 1 minute after the Cobras stopped their assault on the villa, 3 of the waiting Black Hawk helicopters landed in the vicinity of the decimated building. One of the Black Hawks contained the support platoon that was tasked with covering the assault platoon that landed on the roof of the French embassy. And they landed on the French embassy because this provided a pretty good vantage point, like line of sight on what's left of the villa at this point. According to the 22nd Infantry Regiment, a primary participant in the raid, the assault platoon then made its way from the street into the compound and into the house to search for surviving, quote, SNA leadership and any valuable intelligence. The two other Blackhawks landed on the street in front of the meeting, and troops from them quickly streamed out and set up a cordon around the house. Helicopters participating in the raid would drop a total of 22 CS gas grenades to chase away gathering onlookers in crowds. So yeah, obviously you don't want people around. This is not a great thing that's happening here. And again, I know I've said it before. When I started the show, it wasn't to glorify war. And I really hope that I'm doing a pretty good job of not glorifying this whole thing that's happening now. Because this is a series of bad events that's going to lead to an even worse event. Not good. So while there's an American AH-1 Cobra flying over crowds of these Somalis that have gathered around the villa, according to a Somali survivor, American troops stormed the compound after the strike and killed 15 survivors at close range with pistols and rifles. This is a charge that American commanders obviously denied. I would like to think that they didn't, but the only people that know for sure are the guys that were there. And I am not in any way, shape, or form saying, well, we need to find out if these guys did this. Because I don't think we need to know. Because this whole thing is fucking terrible. Like, you fired missiles into a peace conference. So, not cool. And then I would really hope that highly trained special forces guys aren't just like straight up executing people that are crawling out of rubble. I would really tend to think that they would be more likely to render aid. I hope that they would do that instead of just being like, meh, and just start popping dudes. One pilot claimed that the troops on the ground had engaged in sporadic gunfights with some of the survivors. The entire assault was filmed from one of the helicopters, but has never been publicly released. So maybe some off-color things happen. Hard to say. The UN account detailed in the Blue Book claimed that it took 9 minutes for troops to clear the area, search the villa, and depart, all while leaving earlier than expected, marking the Abdi House as the fastest operation that could have been conducted by UNISOM 2. So that kind of sets the precedent here for what's going to happen. High command's kind of got it in their head like, yeah, we can hit these guys and raid them and be in and out in a flash. Like, nobody would even know we were there. We're, in and out in 10 minutes. CNN had received footage of the raid from a Somali cameraman showing the second floor of the conference room covered in, quote, shattered limbs protruding through the rubble. But it was deemed too disturbing and gruesome to show on the air. So it's pretty bad. In the 2.5 years since the civil war had come to Mogadishu, this event that became known as Bloody Monday represented the deadliest loss in a single attack the city had ever seen. According to the Red Cross, 54 Somalis in total were killed, with another 161 injured. Somalia numbers claim 73 killed and 200 injured. Split the difference, I guess, if you really want to find what the real numbers are. Former National Security Advisor Anthony Lake said, quote, the raid was not specifically designed to kill people. Which, I mean, maybe you didn't design it specifically to kill people, but the way it was executed left no wiggle room for not killing people. Because if you really wanted to do this without killing people, you probably could have just landed a helicopter of Delta guys, had them go in, kick the doors in, throw fucking flashbangs and smoke grenades in, and like hem these guys up and question them. Gather any intel that they have, any papers, computers, and maybe not computers at the time, it was 1993. Anything like that. And yeah, you're probably going to have, some collateral damage because some cowboy is going to pull a gun and start a gunfight and get smoked by guys with better equipment and better training. But you're not going to have anywhere between 60 and 80 people killed by fucking missiles. And then a bunch of kids killed by 20 millimeter rounds that were just playing probably soccer or something in the backyard. September 21st, 50 Rangers fast roped from Black Hawk helicopters into a compound in Mogadishu and arrested Osman Hassan Ali, a.k.a. Mr. Addo. First, they strafed the absolute dog shit out of this compound before they went in. They killed a handful of his security forces, and he was pretty upset that they shot a bunch of holes in his coveted Fiat 124. The Rangers took him and 3 others into custody. This was done because Addo was one of Aidid's top guys. He was the, quote, principal advisor to the Aidid militia. Addo is one of the few people in Somalia to be as rich as he was, and he made his money trafficking guns and controlling the khat trade. Khat is a narcotic plant that a lot of Somalis would chew on it when they would go and fight. ADD break. Okay, so this is directly from the this is justice.gov archive. This is from the National Drug Intelligence Center. What is khat? Khat is a flowering shrub native to East. Oh, khat is a flavored. No, khat is a flowering drug. No, learn how to read. Khat is a flowering shrub native to Northeast Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Individuals chew khat leaves because of the stimulant effect, which are similar but less intense than those caused by abusing cocaine or methamphetamine. How is khat used? Khat typically is ingested by chewing the leaves, as is done with loose tobacco. Dried khat leaves can be brewed into tea or cooked and added to food. Yikes. After ingesting khat, the user experiences an immediate increase in blood pressure and heart rate. The effect of the drug generally begins to subside between 90 minutes and 3 hours after ingestion. However, it can last up to 24 hours. Holy shit. What are the risks? Individuals who abuse khat typically experience a state of mild depression following periods of prolonged use. Yeah, that's called withdrawals, dude. Taken in excess, khat causes extreme thirst, hyperactivity, insomnia, and loss of appetite, which can lead to anorexia. Frequent khat use often leads to decreased productivity because the drug tends to reduce the user's motivation. So it's like cocaine and weed all at the same time. Repeated use can cause manic behavior with grandiose delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations. There have been reports of khat-induced psychosis. Interesting. The drug can also cause damage to the The drug can also cause damage to the nervous, respiratory, circulatory, and digestive systems. Yeah. So that's a pretty not cool thing to to be getting all messed up on. He's also real big on importing foreign vehicles to his garages where the militiamen would strip them down and make them into technicals. Basically, to make the technical, you're taking most of the interior out. You're building like kind of roll cages over the top to mount heavy weapons on. Again, if you've seen Black Hawk Down, you've seen the technical. And if you've seen Black Hawk Down, Otto is the guy that's arrested right at the beginning of the movie, where one of the snipers shoots the engine out of his car and then they get out and politely knock on the window after it stops. This is kind of funny, though, because in an interview with BBC, Otto said many aspects of the movie are factually incorrect. He took exception with the, quote, ostentatious character chosen to portray him. He says, quote, I do not look anything like the actor who portrayed me. Smoking cigars or wearing earrings. And these are facts which were later confirmed by SEAL Team 6 sniper Howard E. Wasden in his 2012 memoir. Wasden also indicated that while the character in the movie ridiculed his captors, Otto in reality seemed concerned that Wasden and his men had been sent to kill him rather than capture him. So he's like, oh, balls, you guys are here to... I thought you were going to kill me. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let's just talk then. He additionally stated that he was not consulted about the project or approached for permission, and that the film sequence reenacting his arrest contains several inaccuracies. Quote, first of all, I was caught on 21st September. I was only traveling with one Fiat 124, not three vehicles as it is shown in the film. And when the helicopter attacked, people were hurt, people were killed. The car we were traveling in, and I've got proof, it was hit at least 50 times. And my colleague, Ahmed Ali, was injured on both legs. I think it was not right the way they portrayed both the individuals and the actions. It was not right. Well, sorry, drug lord and purveyor of other scumbaggery that they didn't get that right in the movie. I'm sure next time they will talk to you and use you as a consultant. September 25th, things start getting a little hotter on the ground, and the UN started increasing air patrols. This is about the same time Aidid's guys started hijacking food shipments. This is pretty up. The UN would send out these food shipments. Aidid's guys are hijacking these food shipments. Then they're putting them into trucks and going out into out in the streets of the city. And as soon as crowds would gather to grab these, all these sacks of food, they'd open fire on them with belt-fed machine guns or whatever else they had. This is done pretty frequently. Every time this happened, Aidid would blame it on the UN, saying they were using these food handouts as a setup to mow down innocent Somalis, even though the UN is not doing all the food handoffs. A lot of Aidid's guys are doing the food handoffs and mowing people down. And then occasionally when the UN actually did a food handoff, these guys would roll up in trucks and just pepper the crowd with machine guns. So they are just being terrible to their own people, which is, ugh. On the 25th, a U.S.-built Black Hawk helicopter was patrolling the area of the abandoned presidential palace, which is an Aidid-controlled portion of the city. As the helicopter circled the palace to continue its circuit, a group of Somalis were spotted on the roof. One member of the crew told the pilot to start making some evasive maneuvers because they're taking small arms fire. As they're trying to evade gunfire, the helicopter took a direct impact from a RPG-7, which is a rocket-propelled grenade. The pilot attempted to fly back towards the port and away from Aidid's area. The pilot and co-pilot were the only survivors of this rocket attack. One crew member was thrown from the bird after the impact, and another crew member was killed by shrapnel in the helicopter. When the helicopter finally crash-landed, droves of Somalis converged on the site and started firing on the remaining crew. They danced and sang around the area and eventually gutted what was left of the helicopter and unfortunately came up with some chunks of the airmen and a uniform. There are some unconfirmed reports that the headless body of one of the crew members was dragged through Bakara Market for basically everybody to see. As much as you don't want that to be a thing, it's more than likely accurate from what we're going to see later on in the episode. U.S. Army Major David Stockwell, who was the chief UN military spokesman in Mogadishu, called the downing, quote, a very lucky shot. He could not have been more wrong about that statement. 56 foreign troops, including 7 Americans, have been killed in more than 3.5 months of street fighting in Mogadishu. More than 200 peacekeepers, which I've always hated that name for the UN because UN ground forces don't do a lot of peacekeeping. They do a lot of, I think the scientific word for it would be terrible to the people that they're supposed to be protecting. Ask Somalis and Bosnians and all those folks that have stories of UN peacekeepers coming in and killing people and raping people and, all that stuff, like peacekeeping. More than 200 peacekeepers have been injured, including scores of Americans who have been shot, hit by shrapnel, or injured while running for cover during the near nightly mortar and grenade attacks against U.S. and UN compounds and staging areas. This leads us up to the afternoon of October 3rd, 1993, and the launch of Operation Gothic Serpent. Major General William F. Garrison was on the tarmac walking up and down the rows of Humvees and helicopters. checking in with his men, Rangers from Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment, a contingent of Delta Force, and personnel from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR. This is a mission that had been planned, set up, and scrapped time and time again, but today's the day. It should have been taken as a sign that General Garrison was out there to see his guys off, because of all of the missions that these guys have carried out over the time they've been there, he had never done this before. And he went from Humvee to Humvee, helo to helo, telling them, good luck, stay safe. These are some of the baddest sons of bitches that the U.S. can scrape together and offer for combat. Trained mostly in covert nighttime missions and raids when it comes to the Delta guys. The Rangers do a little bit more generalized stuff, but they are still all badass. Matter of fact, like a good chunk of guys that go to Delta, a lot of them start off as Rangers. A lot of them also start off as like Navy SEALs or Marine Raiders, stuff like that. Delta is one of those, like, we don't really talk about it because it doesn't really exist, because they're essentially the American boogeyman. This mission is to take place in broad daylight. After all the planning and sandboxing and strategizing, the higher-ups decide that this particular mission would take about an hour. This prompted many of the Rangers to forego something that they would later regret, like bringing water and night vision optics with them. Intel came through that a couple of Aidid's top guys were attending a meeting at a 3-story building diagonally across Hulwadig Road, which was the tallest building in the city. Which, it's kind of crazy to think that a 3-story building is the tallest building in a city the size of Mogadishu, because like Mogadishu is a pretty good sized city. But I mean, if I really were to think about it, if I were to go into the city that I work in, I think the tallest building there is like 7 stories, and that's a low income apartment building. But Mogadishu also has a lot bigger population than Rutland. So it took a few minutes to figure out exactly which building this meeting was taking place in. There was an informant on the ground that's supposed to park his vehicle in front of the building, get out, pop the hood to signal that this is the correct place. Again, I'm going to say it again. If you've seen Black Hawk Down, this is the dude that's driving around with the big X on the roof of his car. That actually happened. Finding this building, finding the correct building, took a couple of tries because the informant is scared to death of being seen and killed. He eventually landed in front of the building, and the overhead surveillance bird gave the word, the call sign for today. He gives the word Irene. The hulking UH-60 Blackhawks carrying the Rangers and the nimble little MH-6 Little Birds would deliver the elite Delta operators. They take off in a column of 9 Humvees and 3 deuce-and-a-half trucks, which are the big military transport trucks. They would follow on the 3-mile trip from the headquarters at the Mogadishu airport, headed directly into the city of Mogadishu. I kind of like, I want to nerd out a little bit about Blackhawks because I like helicopters, which, like, some people get train autism. I think mine went to helicopters. Most of my autism points went into helicopters when it comes to vehicles. The Black Hawk is an absolute beast. 64 feet long. It can reach speeds of up to 175 miles an hour. It can carry up to 14 passengers. It can withstand hits from up to a 23 millimeter gun. And one of the coolest things is, for transport, they can be semi-disassembled and loaded into a C-130, which is super cool. From what I saw, they essentially get up on top of it and loosen up the rotors and fold them straight back. So they're slicking the hair back on these things, and they just roll them up on these giant pallets into this even giant-er airplane. The helicopters are going to fly a fairly direct route into the city, and they drop the goons off at the target building, and the Humvees would come through on the K4 circle, hang a left onto Via Agfoy, and then left onto Hollywood and hold position a couple streets south of the Olympic Hotel. So for all you guys watching, be it Spotify, Patreon, or YouTube, patreon.com/1159 media, $5 a month gets you access to the show early, usually not this episode, unfortunately. For everybody watching, I will put maps of all this stuff up. For everybody on social media, like in my Facebook or on the Instagram page, I will post maps of this area as I go, because it's not super important, but it'll kind of help a little bit to know, to be able to like orient where these guys are going, right? At 3:45, the Blackhawks, full of Rangers, converge on the target building. Chalk 1, led by First Lieutenant Larry Perino and Captain Mike Steele, fast rope down at the southeast corner of the building to take up their overwatch position on the corner of National Street. Chalk 2, which is headed up by First Lieutenant Tom DiTomaso, land off their ropes at the northeast corner of the compound. So they're on the corner of the building and National Street. Chalk 3, under Sergeant First Class Sean Watson, roped down on the southwest corner of the building on Halwadig, so they're on the backside of the building. Chalk 4, on the other hand, ran into trouble almost immediately. They're supposed to rope down on the northwest corner of the building, but one of the little birds that's delivering the Delta guys kind of took their slot. So they're dropping off a Delta element that would stack on the Halwadig side of the building. The Blackhawk carrying Chalk 4 had to circuit back about a block north of the building to drop them off there. This is really not good already, because you spend so much time planning these things out and practicing that somebody takes the wrong spot and it throws a monkey wrench directly into the punch bowl immediately. The first man off of Matt Eversman's bird was 18-year-old Todd Blackburn. This guy is in the process of becoming a Ranger. He hasn't gone through Ranger school yet, but he's brought in as a replacement for someone who's injured. Blackburn is assigned as an assistant gunner to Chalk 4's M60 gunner. So he's weighed down with a lot of ammo. The M60 fires a 7.62 by 5.1 NATO, which is a 308 civilian round. 308's a big ass beefy round, and these are on a belt, and this thing fires somewhere in the neighborhood of like 700 to 800 rounds a minute. The M60 has been in use since Vietnam. They called it the Pig. It's this giant, massive firearm. I think they weigh like 30 pounds. They're big. I've never had the chance to pick one up, but I have picked up a civilian version of the M249. No, it was a civilian Mark 49, which is a, if you get the military version, it's a belt-fed 5.56. This one is a magazine-fed 5.56 because it's civilian version, and we are not allowed to have cool stuff like full autos unless you go through like class 3 licensing, and then have, I don't know, for a belt-fed like that, like 150 grand just like kicking around. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating on the price. I'm a gun guy. I've looked at fully automatic weapons to be like, how much are these? How much would it be to get one of these? And to get like a Tech 9 or a Mac 10, like some like the only thing I can think of is like a Grand Theft Auto Vice City drug dealer gun, full auto. Those are like 10 grand. So extrapolate that into something way cooler, way bigger. And yeah, they're like 100, like 100 grand. It's insane. Anyway, it's hard to say exactly what happened. If he fell from the rope, or if when he's coming off the helicopter, he completely misses the rope. Either way, we have the same result. He falls 70 feet to the hard-packed, dusty ground below. Sergeant Eversman is the second one off the bird. He left in such a hurry that he forgot to take off his comms headset. It wasn't like in the movie where you see Blackburn fall out and he's like, oh, and he's like just basically dives at the rope to get out. When he landed and got off the rope, in reality here, after he has grabbed a hold of the rope and forgotten to take this headset off that he takes with him because it disconnects from the inside of the bird, he hits the ground and immediately goes into, his ready position in case they start getting fired on. And he looks over and he sees Blackburn laying there. He thinks that he's already been shot because they were taking fire from the time they arrived over Bakara Market. The first two little birds land, which they could actually land because they were small enough to be able to get onto the street and get in between the buildings. They land and they deliver their Delta guys on the south side of the building, while the second two land on the west side. One of these two is the one that took the position where Chalk 4 was supposed to go in. Delta lands, they kick in the doors, they start slapping the occupants around. Eversman is trying to get Blackburn to safety while all this is going on. Well, Eversman is trying to render aid. The first thing he's noticing is Blackburn is bleeding from the ears, nose, mouth, and he's got a really big bulge in the back of his neck. So Private First Class Jason Moore is ordered to contact the ranger lead of the group, Captain Steele. This whole thing is going bad from the jump. Moore's radio line had been damaged during the fast rope. And this happened because, it's a very small cable for the radio that is against your equipment on the outside view. When he grabbed the rope, he thumbed the cable and grabbed this. It's a 3-inch in diameter nylon rope. And when he slid down it, the friction from the rope and his gloves melted the cable. So his radio is toast, right? Eversman would eventually get through to Lieutenant Perino. After a pretty tense conversation, 2 Delta medics came running over with a portable stretcher. As Blackburn's being loaded, the fire starts to increase. And this is the weird part about the people in Somalia. Most non-combatants would run away from an intense firefight. The people of Somalia ran towards it to see what was going on. This was a regular thing that all of the ground forces there reported, be they Pakistani, Italian, whoever came into like a gunfight with these guys, said the civilians don't run away when you start shooting. They run towards you to figure out what the hell's going on. The Rangers of Chalk 4 provide cover as Blackburn's being carried to the convoy. He would be loaded into one of the Humvees. Two of the Rangers took cover behind one of the other Humvees. Aaron Williamson and Mike Goodale came under heavy fire, resulting in Williamson losing the tip of his finger to a 7.62 round. This did nothing but frustrate Mr. Williamson, who basically switched fingers and started returning fire, killing a handful of Somalis that were firing at them. One of the worst parts about this fighting is how the Somalis tended to fight. The men would often follow groups of women and shoot at any of the American or UN forces from behind the women under their arms. This would result in the Rangers, unfortunately, having to return fire and shooting women and sometimes children that these guys were using as shields. So now we have a super surreal moment that's about to happen. Something that definitely didn't make the movie. I can understand why, I guess, but at the same time, it would have... It's one of those things where I think if they had put it in the movie, people would have gone, that's unrealistic. That never would have happened. Chalk 2's M60 gunner, Sean Nelson, was providing cover down the street from a prone position, looking under a burned out car. He sees a crowd of 8 to 10 men come around the corner, some armed, some not. And among them is the only man in the city that has reached the high enough level to unlock the option for a mount. This man rode into combat with a dirty old AK on top of a cow. Nelson says, quote, "I didn't know whether to laugh or shoot him." uh, the choice was made for him when other Rangers opened up on the party, and Nelson joined in with the big belt fed. And the Rangers didn't just see these guys go, "Oh crap," and start shooting them. They are basically under direct orders, rules of engagement for this whole thing. You're not allowed to fire at them until they fire at you. So the strange part of this situation is in the interchange of gunfire, everyone is killed except for the cow. The cow stood there until a Black Hawk making a strafing run with a minigun. They wanted to make sure that the crowd was taken care of. The minigun, which is made by General Electric, by the way, opened up with its 7.62 by 5.1, it's a 308, at 3,500 rounds a minute, and the cow just exploded. Yeah. All of this is going on, and Delta are putting buckshots into computers and flex cuffing bad guys, of which there were more than they expected, which is kind of a win. Prisoners are face down in the courtyard, and the vehicles rolled up to load them and evac back to the base. At this point, it's 3:50. 5 minutes have passed from the time they first set boots on the ground. The timing of the convoy was set so that they would not arrive until after Delta had all the bad guys out, so they didn't have to make themselves very large targets just kind of sitting around. Sergeant Jeff Stucker was at the wheel of the lead Humvee, and his would be the Humvee that Blackburn got loaded into. He radios to Colonel Danny McKnight, who's the commander of the convoy, who in the movie is played by Tom Sizemore, letting him know that they have critically wounded and they need to evac right now. McKnight sent Stucker and two other Humvees out to return back to the base. Even though he'd gotten turned around on the way into the city, Stucker knew his way back. He knew that he had to get a couple of blocks over to National, take a right onto the K4, bear right at the circle, and then he's home free. It wasn't going to be that easy, though. After the convoy had entered the city, Somalis immediately started building roadblocks out of tires, and he had to find an alternate route. One of the Delta medics in the Humvee was supposedly... This is from... I believe this is something that Stucker mentioned for the book when Mark Bowden interviewed him. One of these Delta boys, this medic, which if you're Delta, you are a gunfighter first, medic second. He's supposedly holding the IV bag up above Blackburn and aiming his Car 15, which is basically like ultra decked out, chopped down M4. They are sweet. Like, I've contemplated my next AR build. I want to do a Black Hawk Down clone build. I'm not sure if I want to do like the 20-inch M16 style or if I want to do a Car 15. Either way, it's going to be awesome. And either way, I can't afford the optic that I want to put on it, so that doesn't count. So he's got this Car 15 aimed out the window, and he's firing while he's holding this IV bag up. So he's firing with one hand with a rifle. I mean, it's a 5.56. There's not a ton of recoil there. Stucker gave orders to the gunner on the 50 cal to concentrate on the left side, and for M60 gunner Dominic Pilla to focus on the left. As the convoy turns back onto National, Dominic Pilla is shot just below the brim of his helmet and killed instantly. If you've seen the movie, he was on the 50. In reality, he wasn't. He was out the window. The man behind him is now splashed with the blood of his fellow Ranger, and he starts yelling that Pilla's hit. Pilla's hit. And then he gets a hold of him and says, "Hey, Pilla's dead." Stucker, the driver, is like, "Hey, you a medic? How do you know he's dead?" And the guy's like, he's dead. He was killed instantly, which is probably a mercy, honestly. At this point in time, the convoy throws caution to the wind, and they go pedal to the metal to get out. Well, they're headed back to base. We're going to jump back to Chalk 4. We have another man wounded, Scott Galentine, who took an AK round to the thumb and somehow didn't lose it. It was just kind of like hanging there by a flap of skin. Kevin Snodgrass had taken a ricochet from the ground, but he's not too badly hurt. Yeah, it's a bullet wound, but it's a ricochet, so it lost a lot of force. It may have even broken up and been smaller pieces, so it didn't do as much damage. He keeps fighting. Delta are finishing loading up, and the gunfire has started to die down slightly when a large explosion is heard overhead. Sean Nelson saw the flash of the explosion and then the trail of the RPG that had hit Super 6-1, which is the call sign for one of these Black Hawks. And then the sound hit everybody. The tail boom of the bird was smoking, the rear rotors stopped spinning, and the helo kept moving forward, and they started to spin and pick up speed, and everyone on the ground saw a man hanging on with both legs flailing outside. Super 6-1 had been providing fire support to the troops on the ground with 4 Delta snipers. Ray Dowdy was on one of the miniguns. Charlie Warren was on the other. Warren called out that there's a guy on the roof with an RPG. He didn't have a shot due to the rotation of the bird, which meant he would be visible pretty quickly to Dowdy on the other side. As Dowdy's asking where he was at, they all felt the impact on the rotor. The pilot, Cliff Elvis Walcott, and co-pilot Donovan Briley, they did everything they could to redirect power within the helicopter. They both realized that they're going in, and they are going in hard. The last radio transmission came from Cliff Walcott. Dowdy and Warren were both in gunner seats, and in kind of a flash of realization, Dowdy felt for his seatbelt and found that he hadn't buckled up. It's one of those things where you expect everything to go exactly right, so you don't necessarily take the precaution to do the right thing. I'm just running to the store. I don't need to put my seatbelt on. And then you get hit by a drunk driver and launched out of your windshield. Horrible. On final approach, the bird clipped the top of a house and flipped sideways, hitting nose first and coming to a stop on its left-hand side. At this point, radio chatter on the ground went absolutely nuts. Everyone's yelling at the same time. And this is the real beginning of the mess. Here's where the task force cracks. The feeling of superiority and invulnerability completely gone. General Garrison and everyone at the JOC, which is the Joint Operations Command, watched on in horror, and his mind starts racing. Should he order just a full pull out and send a second mission in to try to rescue any survivors and scuttle the helicopter? This is all decisions that you have to make right then. As he's thinking about that, he is watching the footage and he sees men crawling from under the wreckage. That thought left his mind as quickly as it entered it. There's a plan in place in case anything like this were to happen, in case someone would drop in and take Super 6-1 spot, and the helicopter carrying the CSAR, which is the Combat Search and Rescue Team, would move in and drop its 15-man team to secure the area and provide medical aid to the injured. Securing the area would become the main priority, as waves of Somalis have already started making their way to the crash site. History showed this is going to end badly, remembering back to the previous helicopter that was shot down, the UN bird, just a couple months prior, and the crew had been mutilated, dragged through the streets. The entire helicopter had been destroyed. Not that the helicopter is more important than the men that were killed in it, because it's not. But when something like this happens, their priority is to get everybody out and then destroy the helicopter, because there's a lot of sensitive stuff in there that if it falls into the wrong hands can come back to bite them in the ass. The command helicopter is flying a lot higher over the city, and they're trying to kind of coordinate everything. They start noticing tall plumes of thick black smoke coming from stacks of burning tires that have been set up around the perimeter of the combat area. And they're also noticing thousands of Somalis flooding in from all different directions. They dug trenches in the roads. They set up roadblocks. They did everything else in their power to make it hard for the Americans to move around. Word was sent for the 10th Mountain Division to mount up and come to the rescue. These guys don't really like if you watch the movie, I don't know that they ever actually mention 10th Mountain. I know there's a documentary, I believe it was on Amazon, specifically from the 10th Mountain side of it. These guys don't really get the credit they deserve, realistically. A lot of the focus goes into the helicopter crews and the guys on the ground, which it should, because those are the guys that were directly involved with the fighting. These are the guys that are losing their friends next to them. These are the guys that are having to make some really, really hard choices, like shooting women and kids if they have to. But the 10th Mountain guys came in, and as we'll see as we move later, probably in the next episodes, these are the guys that came in and tried to pull their asses out of the fire. The guys at Chalk 2 had a good look at where Walcott had crashed, and most wanted to kind of break off what they were doing and rush directly over there and secure the site. Nelson and DiTomaso got into a shouting match. Nelson wanted to go. DiTomaso wanted to wait for orders. They radioed Captain Steele, and Nelson basically said it and took off on his own. He doesn't get more than like a few yards away, and Steele comes back across the radio, saying, "Hey, head for the crash site, secure it." This would leave Chalk 2's position half-manned, which you try not to do stuff like that. Historically, splitting a force is a really bad idea. I'm pretty sure this dude, Sun Tzu, may have said something about that. And then, the Romans tried stuff like that, and it worked pretty badly. The Greeks at some points did stuff like that, and it worked pretty badly. Splitting up your guys is usually not a great call, but you got to do what you got to do in a situation like this. Nelson and 8 other Rangers left, including Lieutenant DiTomaso, and as they're approaching the crash site, they're taking a lot of inaccurate fire from parallel streets. They turned the corner, and they were about 3 blocks from the crash site when they saw a little bird land in the intersection directly in front of them. The bird barely landed when the Somalis rushed it. As they did, the pilot and co-pilot kind of just I don't know if the doors were open or if they had to open the doors or whatever, but they open up with MP5s and handguns. 2 injured men, including the Delta operator Jim Smith, who was, when the helicopter spun down in, they saw somebody hanging off the outside of it. That was Jim Smith. They were helped onto the Little Bird. The Rangers made their way to the Little Bird and found Staff Sergeant Dan Bush gut shot and dead. Again, a horrific way to die. He got hit right below the bottom of his plate. One of the interviews I watched, they talked to one of the guys that was there trying to rescue people, and he said if that thing had hit like a half an inch up, it would have clipped his plate and probably stopped. But that being said, he didn't go down without a fight. He went down swinging. Not only has he survived this crash, but he also dragged a SAW, which is a squad automatic weapon, from the wreck and defended the position, killing nearly a dozen Somalis that had approached. There's another word that a lot of these guys were using for the Somalis. They called them skinnies because they were skinny, because they were starving to death. I was like, I don't know. Doesn't seem... Whatever. It is what it is. You always have a nickname for the people you're fighting, be it skinnies, gooks, ragheads. There's always a derogatory term depending on who you're fighting. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is to make it easier to do what you have to do, because if you assign a nickname to them, You don't have to be like, oh, they're people, right? And I'm not shitting on these guys for doing what they're doing, because in the end, U.S. forces here are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get rid of a guy who is actively starving his own people to death. But everybody's done it. As far back as you can go, everybody had a nickname for their enemy, because it dehumanizes them enough that it makes it easier for them to kill. As all of this is going on, the convoy was back on the move, except instead of heading back to the airfield like they had originally planned, they're now on their way to the crash site as the sky darkens under the shadow of Super 6-4, which is Mike Durant's Black Hawk. That's a name that is going to be very important here in a little bit. Probably next episode. I keep saying probably next episode. And I hate to do this, but I have to leave us on a cliffhanger there, because I don't think anybody really wants to sit and listen to a 4-hour-long podcast. I don't think that would be great for listener retention as it is. So we're going to stop there, and I'm going to come back and finish this episode. But fear not, dear listener, because you'll get both episodes the same day, because that's how we roll around here at the History Goon podcast. So, in the meantime, before you hit play on the next episode, like, subscribe, and share wherever you can. You leave reviews wherever you can. I would love some reviews. That'd be great. I'd like to hear what you guys think. I know Spotify does comments, and I'm more than willing to read Spotify comments. I just have to get some. I mean, I've got a few, but not a bunch yet. And again, you can find me anywhere you find podcasts, like Apple, Spotify, the other ones. I'm also on YouTube over at History Goon Pod. Now, if you punch in History Goon Podcast, you'll find me. We have a Patreon if you want to get episodes early. Patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you access to my show a week early, except this week because, spoiler alert, I'm going to drop this episode on the day of the anniversary of the event. And if you like what you hear and you want to give me a tip directly, I do have a Ko-Fi. It's Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can leave me a tip there if you want. More than happy if you do. That's great. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But if you don't want to leave a tip, at least tell somebody else about the show so we can get the ball rolling. Because this will be episode 25, I think. I really want this thing to take off, because believe it or not, I would much rather do this than my day job. I'd rather do this full time than my day job, because unclogging old people toilets, I mean, it pays the bills, but I wish this would pay the bills instead of having to do that. So pack a lunch, because the next episode is going to get bad. And until then, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like the Rangers in Delta are about to. Thanks.